Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the weekend edition here on Point of View, and we certainly have a lot to cover because this week has been a decision from the Supreme Court having to do with the vaccine mandates. We'll talk about that in just a few minutes. Very good article by Lathan Watts about the Navy SEALs. So we'll give you an update on that particular topic. Since Lathan is here today, of course, we'll also always post a Victor Davis Hanson piece just for his benefit. And most importantly, we have a very good commentary by Penna Dexter on mail order abortion. And Penna, it is just great to see you again in the studio.
It's good to be here, and it's actually good today to celebrate at least a partial victory by the Supreme Court on this vaccine mandate.
And again, I might just mention Lathan Watts, of course, Director of Public Affairs at First Liberty. Penna Dexter, of course, as the guest host and co-host here, and we are going to probably get into this issue. Penna, let me come to you first, because as you point out, 6-3, 5-4, depends on which particular case you look like, and in some respects, it's at least a partial victory, right?
Well, it is. It keeps the mandate for businesses from going into effect, and it allows the mandate for Medicare, Medicaid workers to stay in effect, to be in effect. So the business one was businesses of 100 employees or more, and it was just it was a draconian mandate. Some businesses liked it because it kind of took the onus off them because they wanted to require the vaccine anyway. But now they're going to have to do it on their own because the federal government is not going to be standing behind that. And President Biden, of course, is saying, well, businesses, you can go ahead and implement the mandate anyway. And that's exactly the point. If businesses want to mandate that their employees get a vaccine, they can do it. They're allowed to do it. They could lose a lot of employees by doing it, so they have to make that calculation. And the federal government was overreaching by doing this, and the court seemed to agree. And we had Thomas Alito, Gorsuch, and Barrett also objecting to the health care worker requirements, but Kavanaugh did not. He thought those requirements were okay, along with the liberals.
Yes. Well, again, I guess we shouldn't be surprised because, Lathan, you've reminded us more than once, we don't really have a 6-3 court. We have a 3-3-3 court. But what about this? Penna was talking about overreach. That's a nice statement for saying they were trying to do things that I think were unconstitutional.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Supreme Court made it clear on the OSHA mandate, at least, that they don't have the statutory authority to do what they were trying to do. Which, you know, if you listen to Biden during the presidential debates, he said the same thing. No, we can't do that. And then, of course, he did it anyway, or tried to. So it was good news that the Supreme Court blocked that order from going into effect while the underlying litigation goes on. So it's important to note, like, this was not a decision. This didn't throw out, the mandate altogether. What it did was it blocked it from going into effect while the litigation that's at the Sixth Circuit moves forward. Mm-hmm. So the Sixth Circuit still has to rule on it. But, when the Supreme Court says we're going to stop this from going into effect, anytime a court considers a preliminary injunction or, a stay of an order or anything like that, the first factor they consider is whether or not the person who is asking for this is likely to prevail on the merits of their case. And so the Supreme Court has now said, we think, these people that are challenging this are likely to prevail on it, and that's why we're going to block it from going into effect. So the Sixth Circuit had better pay attention, because the Supreme Court thinks these people should win, or that they are likely to anyway. So that's hope,
it's a good point,
that the Sixth Circuit will get this right and toss it. Then it would be up to the government if they wanted to appeal to the Supreme Court. But you now have, a 6-3 majority that has said you don't have the statutory authority to do this. So there's still a little bit of a wait and see, but it was definitely a win.
I thought it was kind of funny that President Biden then, after this loss, basically said, well, we're going to get another 500 million free tests out to the public, which they haven't even got the first 500 million that they promised out. And so, all these tests that they keep promising, and it keeps being a talking point for the president, like, oh, we're doing something about it. Whereas, everywhere I look, I see people who can't get a test.
Yes.
They can't find out if they even have the Omicron virus. And so, it's just kind of crazy. Everything has such a lag time on it that they're not even dealing with reality anymore.
I know. That is a sad commentary. I want to get some legal opinion for you in just a minute, because one of the things that you suggested we might post, and it's a very good piece on the Supreme Court's right turn, and this one comes from a person that's lamenting this, of course, but in the midst of it, it talked about this legal doctrine called non-delegation. Let's convene, if you will, Law School 101 for just a minute. See if you can, in a simple way, explain that, because 3 of the justices use that as a justification for why this is such a bad idea. Once you understand that, it really comes from reading the Constitution, which I know is a concept, but nevertheless,
right. Yeah.
It's the idea that legislature should legislate, and the legislature can't tell the executive branch to legislate, right?
Yeah, that's what the non-delegation doctrine is, and it may come as a surprise to the author of that article. It is not a dormant legal theory. It's not even a legal theory. It's in the text of the Constitution, for crying out loud. You have 3 branches of government.
Yes.
Only one of them can legislate, and that's Congress. But since the birth of the administrative state, going all the way back to Woodrow Wilson and then FDR, yes, and it's grown and grown and grown, Congress has increasingly sort of outsourced their job to
yes,
the administrative agencies. And so the non-delegation theory is that Congress, you can't do that. And in the CMS case, the case that was challenging the mandate for any healthcare workers that work in a facility that receives funding from Medicare and Medicaid, the court upheld, they did not block that one. And there were 2 dissents filed in that case, one written by Thomas that Alito, Gorsuch, and Barrett joined, and then one written by Alito that Thomas, Gorsuch, and Barrett joined. And in one of those, they mentioned the non-delegation doctrine. So, it's basically Constitution 101. There's only one legislative branch.
Yes.
Congress, you got to do your job. Yeah. If there's going to be a law on something, it has to be enacted by the people who are accountable to the voters. And that's the problem with outsourcing lawmaking to the executive branch agencies. Those bureaucrats are not accountable to anyone. That's Nobody gets to vote on those people. And if you don't think it's a law, violate one and find out and watch what happens to you. You'll find out quick. It does have the effect of a law.
We're up on break, but I know that there's something called the Chevron deference, that when Gorsuch was nominated to the court, he said he thought it was maybe about time to get rid of that. And I think that's what we're talking about here. So we're about up on a break, but it's actually going to be possibly really good for reining in the administrative state to a point, maybe bringing Congress back to its proper role.
Sure. And you might remember we've talked in the past about Neil Gorsuch sometimes would say, look, if you write an ambiguous law, we don't expect us as the court to try to fix it. You go back and fix it. So that's kind of the concept. We'll come back and get into that a little bit more, because it was very key in this decision, might be a key in future decisions. Got a lot to cover. We will do that right after the very important messages right now.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Liberals in America often say they believe the U.S. needs to be more like Europe. The next time I hear this, I will respond, so that means you want more restrictive laws on abortion and more voter integrity laws? As I documented last month, if you look at the abortion laws in most European countries, they are quite like the Mississippi law currently being considered by the Supreme Court. That is also the case when you compare our voting laws to European countries. Professor John Lott, in a speech he delivered at Hillsdale College last September, spoke on the topic of election integrity. He began by reminding us that 16 years ago, the Carter-Baker Commission on Federal Election Reform proposed a uniform system of requiring a photo ID to vote. It also pointed out that widespread absentee voting made vote fraud more likely. It is important to remember that none of these claims were controversial 16 years ago. They came from Democrats like former President Jimmy Carter and Republicans like former Secretary of State James Baker. He then documented that of the 47 countries in Europe today, 46 of them currently require government-issued photo IDs to vote. The one exception is the United Kingdom. But even that isn't much of an exception. Many parts of the UK do require voter ID, and the British Parliament is now considering a nationwide requirement. What about absentee voting? Of the 47 European countries, 35 of them don't allow absentee voting for citizens living in country. Another 10 countries allow absentee voting but require voters to show up in person and present a photo ID. If we truly want the U.S. to be like Europe, then we should have more of these election integrity laws. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
It's been a very busy week, and it's certainly not been a good week for the president. Goes to Atlanta, talks about issues. We're going to be talking about the filibuster in just a few minutes, talking about election law. We will certainly talk about, as we have a piece here on politicizing COVID-19. But, Penna, we were just getting into this whole issue of what the court would allow and what Congress can or cannot delegate. And you mentioned this idea of Chevron deference. We might get back to that.
Well, first of all, this is a great article. I'm glad Lathan suggested it because, we have these high-profile cases. We have the case about the Mississippi abortion law that's been argued. We'll get the decision in the summer. And then we have a gun control case. So these are big and they're high-profile, but there are other less flashy cases that could also have very important effects on American lives and on the way the justices decide cases in the future. And this Chevron deference, it was a case from 1984 involving the energy company Chevron. It gives federal agencies, this is from the article, a lot of wiggle room to interpret the laws they're charged with carrying out, which in one sense makes sense because they understand the ins and outs of what they're trying to do. But it's been used to give unelected bureaucrats way too much power. And so this case then, I guess it was used in the language of the half of this case that was decided yesterday that has to do with the healthcare workers about reimposing the non-delegation doctrine, which would give judges more influence over federal regulations. So maybe Lathan could explain to us I think you're much better qualified to do that, how that would work, why that's the case with this half of the case that was decided yesterday.
Yeah, so like you said, Chevron deference comes from the case that involved Chevron, and that's why they call it that. But it's basically the idea that the administrative agencies that write these regulations, that if there's something that's vague or needs interpretation and it comes up in court, that the courts should defer to the agency's interpretation of that rule. But what ends up happening is then agencies can maybe not intentionally write something vague so that they can interpret it however they want to, and maybe interpret it in a way that gives them more authority than they should have. And so people that have been critics of the administrative state have always hated this Chevron deference. And the author of this article, who's certainly on the left side of the aisle, says that, well, if they claw back Chevron deference, that's going to give more power to the courts. That's not actually what it does. What it does is it takes away some of the power of the executive branch agencies, and that if something is vague, courts should strike it down. And so for the very fact that it is vague, and it needs to be better crafted. And so that would be, and there are two cases this term that the article mentions that most people probably wouldn't normally pay attention to. There's one where several states are challenging some things under the Clean Air Act, and there's another over the formula that CMS uses for funding in Medicaid and Medicare. And both of those are seen as vehicles for the court to possibly kind of claw back on Chevron deference and the non-delegation doctrine that, the legislature is supposed to write laws, not the executive branch. And if the executive branch crafts something, from a rulemaking standpoint, and it's, exceeds their authority, courts should say so.
So do you think our courts, not only the Supreme Court, but other courts, are moving in the direction of, this is not, they say that this is a dormant, this delegation doctrine is dormant. It's not really dormant, but it's not as, perhaps it needs to be more important in their thinking than it has been.
Yeah, and the fact that in the CMS decision that came out, even though they did not block the CMS mandate in the dissent by Alito and Thomas were the authors. There were two separate ones. And I forget which one, but they raised the non-delegation doctrine. And so what this article is pointing out is that there's a block on the court that wants to get back into this, and
a good thing.
And that would be a good thing. Yeah, she's lamenting it, but that would actually be a good thing. Because Congress should be the people writing the laws. And if we elect a bunch of empty suits who are too lazy to do the job of writing laws, what they do is they outsource it. They write something, broad and vague, and just delegate to the administrative agency that's supposed to enforce the law, the real lawmaking process. And that's not, that's not what's in the Constitution. And so I think there's a responsibility on the behalf of us, the voters, to stop sending empty suits to Congress, because that's really, to me, the bigger problem.
Yes.
You've got people, just a bunch of game show hosts up there, who are really good at, quote, owning the other side on Twitter or delivering a soundbite, but aren't actually any good at doing the job. This is what's happened.
Need legislators. Yes.
Go up there and do the job.
That's right.
Make the laws. And, even if we continue sending empty suits up there, if the court says, no, non-delegation is a thing, Congress, you have to write the laws. And you got a bunch of lazy empty suits up there, you're also likely to get fewer laws, which
isn't always a bad thing.
Is not a bad thing. So I think there's a lot of good that can come out of this, and I'll be watching those two cases to see if this block on the court can, bring. I was shocked that Kavanaugh didn't go with them, because he was known as a pretty big critic of the administrative state when he was on the D.C. circuit. So, but as I've said on here many times, it's always the conservatives who are surprised by quote our justices. The libs are never surprised by theirs.
We know how all three votes are going to come before the oral arguments took place last week.
Well, I thought this article was it was actually positive in another way, and that is that the other quote unquote non-flashy case actually that's going before the Supreme Court that's already been argued is on school choice, the main case, and so that has been going the right direction in a couple of other cases starting in 2017, and so. It's very possible, and it's your case, along with the Institute for Justice, Lathan, that school choice could make some great advances. And of course, we've had a perfect storm of COVID, letting parents know, what's really going on in their schools. And so many are saying the public schools, they're not for us anymore. But we can't afford a private school. We can't even afford to homeschool. So this is coming at a good time.
Yeah, and she mischaracterizes the Carson versus Macon case as well, saying that, oh, no, you might be forced to subsidize religious education. That's not at all what is at issue in that case. What's at issue is the state of Maine decided in some very rural areas where there aren't enough kids to have a high school that the state would give the money that would have been spent on educating those kids to the parents, and they can choose how to spend that money to send their kid to a private school unless they choose a religious school. And the court has said in other contexts, if you're going to have a program that is open to the general public, you cannot exclude religion from it. And that's the very similar facts in Montana from last term, the Espinoza decision. It goes back to the Trinity Lutheran decision that was basically a church applied for a grant to resurface the playground at their school and were denied because they were a church. And the court has said, look, you don't have to have these programs, but if you do, you can't exclude religion from it. What's really at issue is the attempt to exclude religion from public life. And that, these programs like these school scholarship programs that are school choice programs, the court has made it pretty clear. You don't have to have a school choice program, but if you do, you cannot keep religion out of it.
Right.
You can't exclude religion from public life. There is a role for religion in public life. The government can't prefer it over non-religion, and it can't prefer one religion over another. It has to be neutral towards religion. It can't treat it better or worse. It has, if there's a publicly available benefit, you can't keep religion out of it.
Let me just mention, we're coming to a break, and one of the things we're going to talk about today is a take action item on Save the Filibuster. We'll get into that a little bit later, but if you go to the website right now, you'll find that. We still have the fact sheet available if you want to decide not to watch the Olympics out of China, but we are going to be moving on to that issue. But this second article that we've posted, it is not one that we agree with. It's actually just the opposite, but it, I think, makes the case because there's a line on the third page. A victory for the families in Maine, which would be the case out of First Liberty, would also continue a long winning streak for religious plaintiffs. In other words, as I said to Lathan last week, remember the old phrase, you're going to get tired of winning? Well, so far they're not tired of winning there at First Liberty, and every time we turn around, as we'll talk about in just a few minutes with the Navy SEALs case, you guys are winning. And this was causing her some indigestion. So you can read it from the other side, and we'll come back with some more comments and your phone calls right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition. If you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Lathan Watts, and we're going to get into the first article, which you kind of jumped over because we wanted to spend just a little bit of time talking about the vaccine mandate. Of course, this week the president went to Atlanta and made some comments about an election. That's going to get into some of the other issues we are going to cover in just a few minutes, perhaps maybe even next hour, the rate we're going here, but we'll get to those and the whole issue of the filibuster, but since we were talking about church state, I thought I'd just mention, for those of you watching online, that our latest book hasn't been mailed yet, so don't get too upset if you haven't seen it in the mail, but it will come out shortly on church and state. We felt that it was about time maybe to have a booklet on that. After all, we didn't want to have First Liberty have all the fun, so we put together this one on church and state issues, which helps you understand some of the reasons why when you look at this second article, it says the church-state separation will continue to be eroded because they have this assumption that they are supposed to be a rigid separation between church and state. And we'll give you some good answers for that, again, to equip you. But Penna, let's, if we can, talk about the first article, because this story about the Navy SEALs has really captured people's attention. When I'm out and about, people will always talk about Coach Kennedy. But another one that seems to have really resonated with people is, why in the world would you mandate some of the healthiest, probably the strongest people you could imagine, Navy SEALs, to get a vaccine? And more importantly, why would you then threaten to force them to have to pay back all of the money involved in their training if they did not? And so this has been a very important legal victory, and the article by Lathan is why this legal victory for the Navy SEALs matters.
Yeah, and so at the point that the Navy SEALs go through this rigid training, they do dangerous work, they sacrifice for their country, and yet they are being now squeezed to get the vaccine, or either have to leave, and also, I mean, we know they're highly trained to pay back the training costs. And, you know, why would you want to throw out such a wonderful resource for the protection of our freedoms and for our country in the name of this vaccine mandate? These are healthy people. They're probably not going to have a bad case of COVID if they get it. And they're smart people. They probably would stay out of, harm's way for other people. So, I mean, I'm just so happy to hear that you and the other party on this case actually won a victory for the Navy SEALs.
Yeah, we asked for a preliminary injunction, and Judge O'Connor here in the Northern District of Texas, where we filed the case, granted it. So that means that the SEALs, one, don't have to get the shot while the litigation moves forward, and two, even more importantly, the DOD and the Navy can't take action against them for requesting this accommodation and for going to court. So that's an important win because, as I said before, the first thing that a judge considers when deciding whether or not to grant an injunction is the party likely to prevail on the merits of the case. And Judge O'Connor thinks our clients are likely to prevail and therefore granted the injunction. So that's good news. That means, Judge O'Connor thinks we have a good shot at winning the underlying litigation. I didn't get a chance because you have a kind of a word limit, when you do op-eds like this. But a lot of our clients in this case, several of them have already had COVID. So they have antibodies. And you're still going to try to force them to get this shot? I mean, these guys do work in some of the worst conditions known to man. If anybody can fight and win a battle with a head cold, it's a Navy SEAL. Mm-hmm. Okay. And I think the more important principle is the same faith that they're requesting be accommodated so that they not have to get this vaccination is the same faith that compels them to willingly lay down their life for their country. And if the Constitution, if we expect these people to go into the darkest corners of the world and fight to protect these freedoms for us, how in the name of all things holy are we not going to let them have the same rights? And do you want somebody who is that skilled in the deadly art of combat to not have any sort of moral compass beyond the following of orders? Because that's what you get when you purge religious people from the military. And the number one cited reason when they poll military members for why did you join is religious belief. And so do we really want, from a national security standpoint, from just a student of history, have we learned nothing from Nuremberg? Do you want people so skilled at killing people and breaking things to not have any sort of moral compass beyond, well, I was just following orders? This was an order. They have a moral contradiction with it, and they've asked not to follow it. And that should be accommodated. This is not going to weaken our military in any way. The Navy brags about having 99.4% of the Navy is already vaccinated. Then what is so important about forcing these men to violate their own conscience to get this shot? If Desmond Dawes can win the Congressional Medal of Honor in World War II without ever touching a weapon, a Navy SEAL can do his job without getting a shot.
You know, I noticed in your newsletter this week, Lathan, that the Navy has actually thrown out 20 sailors. They're not SEALs, they're just sailors who declined the COVID-19 vaccine. So that's like after this Navy SEAL ruling. But there's something about this has bothered me all along, and that is the idea that they're finding out the people who are asking for religious exemptions are rising to the top. They know who they are. And for some reason, our military leaders in this country don't want religious people, which is exactly, as you just said, the kind of people that volunteer for the military are often motivated by their religion. So what's happening there?
Yeah, I think there's a bigger purge or attempted purge of the military of people of faith. And we've seen it in other contexts with the January 6th inquiry and the hearing on extremism in the military. The military defined extremism in a way that would have basically thrown out every Catholic and evangelical Christian. And when they had that hearing, Mike Berry, who handles all of our military stuff, was the lone witness. He was the minority witness in the hearing, pointing that out, that you are telling every person of faith in the military that they're not welcome here anymore. And, another thing that Judge O'Connor pointed out is that each and every request for religious accommodation is supposed to be evaluated on its own merits. You're supposed to look at them on a case-by-case basis. And every one of our clients got the exact same, almost word-for-word, identical rejection letter, which it's a form letter. They are rubber stamping rejections to all of these. Judge O'Connor points out that the Navy has not granted a single religious accommodation request on this vaccine, that in the past, I think 5 to 7 years, has not granted a single religious accommodation request on any vaccine. And the Navy's process for evaluating, the SEALs are prized and respected even amongst other military people for speed and precision. And they are being victimized by a process that is neither. Mm-hmm. Now, Judge O'Connor points out in his order that the Navy's process for evaluating requests for religious accommodation is a 6-phase, 50-step process. And the bureaucrat in uniform is not required to even read the request until step 35. Mm-hmm. So the first 34 steps in the process don't even require them to read the request. And it's blatantly, it's a sham. Their whole process is a sham, and Judge O'Connor points that out in his order granting this injunction. And so we are optimistic we're going to win this case on the merits, and then we'll see if the Navy wants to appeal it. But if they do, then we're likely going to the Fifth Circuit, which is a friendly circuit for religious liberty. We may be able to win, on a larger basis for everyone in the military.
So again, the group has no patience or tolerance for service members who refuse COVID-19 vaccination for religious reasons. The Navy's accommodation process confirms those fears. And again, you've got that whole quote here with it's a 50-step process, and you have to get down to 35 before you even read it. That doesn't sound to me like an objective look at the process, Penna. So again, we wanted you to read that article, and Lathan explains why that might be important, not only to you, because not very many of our listeners are Navy SEALs or even know Navy SEALs, but it could affect some of the other issues as well. We're going to take a break. When we come back, though, let's, if we can, talk about Penna Dexter's commentary, because you'll have a chance, if you're listening online, to hear that. It's called Mail Order Abortion. And again, we have a booklet on that, but more importantly, we've been looking at the decision that will be coming down, as Penna has pointed out just a minute ago, certainly by the summer, probably be the last decision actually posted in June, but nevertheless, there are some other things going on that you need to know about, and you would certainly hear that right now. If you go to our website, pointofview.net, you can see and listen to Penna's commentary, which we've posted there today. So we come back from the break, we'll talk about that. Then we have quite a bit of other material to cover. Victor Davis Hanson talking about politicizing COVID-19. We found out why that first letter was written to the School Board Association, actually linking school board protesters to being domestic terrorists. You'd be surprised where that came from. We'll be right back.
Most people don't know this, but roughly half of abortions performed today are not done surgically. They are chemical abortions. Last month, the FDA officially made it much easier to procure such abortions. The chemical abortion is approved to be used during the first 10 weeks of pregnancy. It involves a two-step process which causes a miscarriage. The pregnant woman takes a drug called mifepristone, or RU-486. The drug serves to cut off the hormone progesterone, which is required to sustain a pregnancy. Within 24 to 48 hours, the woman will take a second set of pills, misoprostol. The brand name is Cytotec. These cause contractions. She will likely experience cramping and hemorrhaging, which are often severe, and within a few hours to a few days, she'll expel the baby, alone in her bathroom. The FDA operates a safety program for certain drugs that requires they only be dispensed by a qualified provider. This program also requires the drug be dispensed in certain healthcare settings, such as a clinic or hospital. Mifepristone is one of the drugs that must meet those conditions. But last spring, in its efforts to contain the spread of COVID-19, the FDA stopped enforcing the in-person requirement. So women were getting the abortion pill by mail and taking it alone. Melanie Israel, who writes on abortion issues for the Daily Signal, points out the complication rate from abortion pills is 4 times that of a first trimester surgical abortion. One 13-year study shows a 500% increase in emergency room visits after chemical abortions. Plus, mail-order abortions provide greater opportunity for coercion by an abuser. This risky situation was supposed to be temporary, but in December, in response to demands by the abortion industry, the FDA formally ended the in-person requirement altogether. The FDA just made abortion even more dangerous. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, as we've pointed out before, there are some real opportunities for you to follow along with many of our Viewpoints commentaries. Mine come out Monday through Friday and end up in your inbox. Penna's comes out and it lands in your inbox on Saturday, but we've already posted it there. It's entitled Mail Order Abortion. And while we're wondering whether or not there would be an overturning of Roe versus Wade, there's some other things going on with chemical abortion. And I appreciate you writing about this.
You know, it's going to be a wonderful victory if the Mississippi law is upheld with abortion at 15 weeks. But I don't think most people know this. And I actually didn't know this until I read it in an article in the Daily Signal, and I've read it other places since, that about half of the abortions that are performed today are done chemically, which means it's the abortion pill. It's RU-486 or mifepristone. You take that, and it used to be that you went to the doctor and took it, got the pill, took it, and then you got these other pills. They're called Cytotec or misoprostol, and you take those. The first one actually cuts off progesterone, so that sustains the pregnancy. The second pills, misoprostol, they cause the contraction so that you'll expel the baby. And, of course, if this is done, and during COVID, I mean, you kind of can understand that they began to do these telehealth appointments, and then they began to just not even take a look at the baby, not do a sonogram or anything else. Just if someone wanted an abortion, this quote unquote doctor would supply it. So they really are mail order abortions. Well, this was supposed to be a temporary situation, emergency kind of thing, but they actually now the Biden FDA has gone ahead and just made it permanent and has said the abortion industry loved that situation, that women could just order their pills and have an abortion. And so now the in-person requirement that was required before COVID is completely gone, no matter COVID or no COVID. And so, of course, abortion is more dangerous. And when you don't get an ultrasound, that means you can't precisely date the pregnancy. And this is supposed to be done in the first 10 weeks. It's pretty dangerous, even in the first 10 weeks. So you can't do that, and you can't see if it's an ectopic pregnancy. Ectopic pregnancy is very dangerous to the woman. So you don't have a doctor involved, really. And that is, we've had battles over that before. We got these requirements for in-person visits, but now they're gone under the Biden administration. And there's a new FDA commissioner, actually head of the FDA, that's about to be confirmed, who all the pro-life groups are very upset about because actually 49 pro-life groups don't want the Senate to confirm this woman because this doctor it's a man, Dr. Robert Califf. He is all on board with these mail order abortions. And so, he may be the FDA commissioner. So it may not, we may not be able to reverse this policy. And it's just a dangerous one. It really puts, and when you think about it, what about abuse? What about coercion for abortion? And if you don't even have a doctor to talk to in person, you don't really have anyone to help you if you're a young woman in this situation.
You have a good quote there, and that comes from Melanie Israel, who wrote that piece. The complication rate for abortion pills is 4 times that of a first trimester surgical abortion. And we do have a booklet on abortion pill that we had Liberty McCarter write. But again, you can get that. But already I would encourage some of you, especially if you work in a pregnancy resource center or you really want to educate other individuals about this, you do go into all the details, some of the concerns, including the social concern, as you point out, that mail order abortions provide greater opportunity for coercion by an abuser. And so I just think this is an important piece. Penna Dexter has written it. You can go to our website right now and read it. You can also sign up to receive these particular commentaries, but let me encourage you to do that. And of course, your inbox, if you indeed have already signed up, will show up tomorrow with this particular article. Lathan, another issue that we try to educate people about here on Point of View, and I doubt you'll read about it very much in the mainstream press.
No, and, I'll tell you who else likes this ruling by the FDA besides the abortion industry, and that's sex traffickers.
Wow.
Because that's the easiest way to cover up your crime. Because when somebody you have trafficked becomes pregnant, that is evidence that they have been trafficked in sex trafficking, and this allows them to just order the pill, get it in the mail, as you said, force the sex slave basically to take it, and it makes it easier to cover up their crime. And it's, the irony of ironies. One of the arguments that the pro-abortion lobby always makes is about the health of the mother, and that's why some women choose, to abort their children. Well, this endangers the life of the mother far more than, as you said, going to see a doctor about even this procedure. So it's a terrible decision, and it may indicate that the Biden administration is nervous about the Dobbs decision.
Yes.
That they think there's a chance the court may overturn Roe v. Wade, and so they're trying to do what they can beforehand. Yeah,
promote chemical abortion. Again, Penna Dexter's commentary there. Right next to it is our take action item. And I thought just for a minute, before we take a break, we might talk about the fact that we want to encourage you to contact your 2 senators about Save the Filibuster. Now, there has been a threat that if indeed we don't begin to get rid of all these election integrity laws, that was at least the argument from the president and the vice president, then we will actually get rid of the filibuster. But on the way to getting rid of the filibuster, you had Joe Manchin, Kristen Sinema, as well as maybe 2 or 3 others that are starting to step forward, even on the Democratic side of the aisle, saying we will not get rid of the filibuster. But I thought there was a pretty good speech the other day by Senator Tom Cotton. Did you catch that speech at all?
Yes, I did. One of my favorites up there in D.C. If for no other reason than I'm really happy about the fact that one of the senators from Arkansas is Senator Cotton. I just like that. But he's been a rock star ever since he got there, and he made a speech on the floor of the Senate this week about the danger of getting rid of the filibuster. In that speech, the entirety of the speech, every word of it, was a quote from Chuck Schumer,
yes,
who previously got up and defended the filibuster when the Democrats were in the minority. And, people probably get tired of hearing me, say this on here that, nobody's better at circular firing squads than Republicans, but nobody's better at overreach than the Democrats. And when they get in power, they never think they're ever going to be out of power. And so they do things like this, like, well, yeah, I mean, we're always going to be in the majority, so let's get rid of the filibuster, which is the number one tool of the minority. And they were warned about this back when Harry Reid was the leader, when they lifted it on certain nominations, and the Republicans told him, if you do it on this, we're going to do it on Supreme Court justices. And that's exactly what happened, which is why they couldn't stop any of Trump's Supreme Court nominees, which is why you have as conservative a court as you have right now. But they insist on learning the hard way, so we'll see.
Chuck Schumer, I mean, we have all those quotes from Tom Cotton quoting Chuck Schumer, but, it's really true that he might not really be that progressive. It's just that he's got AOC nipping at his heels, trying to primary him. And if, he will be primaried and possibly even lose his congressional or his Senate seat if she does that. So he's really stuck. He's really stuck, and he's being very political right now. So, Eric Erickson said he almost felt sorry for Chuck Schumer right now.
Almost.
Yeah. Well, we're going to a break, but again, we have given you an opportunity to contact your 2 senators. We've got a picture there of course, Mr. Smith goes to Washington. You had to actually post that there. And if you click on the button to contact your senators, you can tell them, we want to keep the filibuster. We really want the minority to be able to express their opinion. We'll be right back.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Lathan Watts and Penna Dexter here. And Penna was just a few minutes ago talking about her commentary, which I do commend to you. If you work in a pregnancy resource center, you would certainly want to have that. I'm holding up as well this particular booklet that was done by Liberty McCarter, and it is entitled The Abortion Pill. And this came out a number of months ago, in which even at the time she was talking about the fact that if we start seeing the ability of a woman to obtain a medical abortion online, would be, again, the possibility of what we're just talking about a minute ago in these mail order abortions. So this one kind of gives you some of the facts, tells you a little bit about Plan B, prostaglandins, gives you a couple of resources. And I would say put this kind of a historical look with Penna's recent commentary. And those would be two pieces of information that I would encourage you to get a copy of. Of course, you can go to our website right now and find the mail order abortion viewpoints right there on the left column. In the middle, Save the Filibuster. And for just another minute or two, let me come to you, Lathan, because we've talked to you in the past about, again, not getting rid of the filibuster, about court packing. And lest anybody think that those are issues that we should be looking at through our rearview mirror, during the break, you came across a piece which was being promoted. And so when you find yourself saying, well, where can I get some good information? Of course, we have information about saving the filibuster today on the Point of View website. But also, if you go to firstlibertylive.com, do I have that right? That's where you've done some things on court packing. But just tell us what you've run across just in the last few minutes.
Yeah, I just came across a Washington Post opinion, the title of which is The Alternative to Supreme Court Enlargement is Surrender. So, and then their tweet about it says, the only effective way to undo the right wing's Supreme Court power play is to unpack it by adding 4 justices. I mean, to say nothing of the Greco-Roman wrestling match with the English language that is that tweet. Let me just
unpack it by packing it.
Unpack it by packing it.
Yes,
yeah, basically.
I
gotcha. So according to the Washington Post, the Supreme Court has been packed by the constitutional process of replacing vacancies. And that the only way to undo it is to add 4 justices,
which is packing,
which is court packing. That's exactly what court packing is. And this we've been very active on it. Biden had his commission. They said they wanted public feedback, so we gave them a dose of it.
Yes, you
to
did.
The tune of almost 500,000 signatures saying it's a bad idea. And
yes,
then
you did.
They came out with their recommendations, and it was pretty ho-hum. But I've said on this show that, if the Supreme Court, let's say the Dobbs case comes out in June and they overturn Roe v. Wade, the left will collectively set its hair on fire and run to the nearest microphone, and the very first thing that's going to come out of their mouth is pack the court. And you're already seeing it. They're building up to it right now. So it's incredibly important that people, just like contacting their senators to defend the filibuster, keep reminding them that court packing is a terrible idea. It was a bonehead idea, to quote Joe Biden when he was talking about FDR doing it. And it was in 1937 when FDR tried it, and he was opposed by members of his own party. And it's a terrible idea now. It would politicize the court in a way it was never intended to be. It's another one of those things that the left thinks, will always be in power. So if we do it, it's okay. But it's a complete ignoring of human nature. If you do it, I guarantee you the other side's going to do it to counterbalance that. And eventually we're going to have Supreme Court arguments in a football stadium because there'll be that many judges on the court.
And I've seen it in other countries, by the way.
Venezuela.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Venezuela, once Chavez got in power, he packed the court. And from the day he packed the court to the day he died, they never once ruled against him. Not one time. It turns the court into basically another political branch, which we've talked about on here many times, that it's not supposed to be. They're not supposed to be respondent to, quote, the will of the people. Their job is to interpret the Constitution and apply it. And if the people express their will in a way that's contradictory to that, it's their job to say no. If the people want something bad enough, they can amend the Constitution. That's the process is right there. If you politicize the court, there is no going back. It is the crossing of the Rubicon when it comes to judicial independence, to the proper role of the judiciary. It is as bad an idea as you will come across when it comes to our system of government.
Again, when you look at the court, I don't think the solution is to put more justices on the court, but maybe put some justices on the court that get their facts correct. Because last Friday, I was struck by the number of statements by relatively smart individuals.
Well, they're Supreme Court justices.
Supreme Court justices. And I don't expect somebody that goes to law school to know a lot about chemistry or physics or biochemistry or molecular biology or virology. But you had some statements by especially the three liberal justices. A comment by Breyer, which maybe was just a misstatement about $750 million. I don't think you got that one right.
We don't even have that many people in the country.
Elena Kagan somehow thinking that if you have the vaccine, you'll never pass it on. But then the all-time winner, which you mentioned last Friday, was Sonia Sotomayor on point after point. Even the liberal fact-checkers had to say, okay, this is so bad, we've got to talk about this.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in her confirmation hearing, the famous statement she made was, the court could benefit by having a wise Latina on the court. Well, she didn't sound so wise last week. And if you listen to the questions she asks at oral argument, even read some of the opinions that she writes, they're many times devoid of legal reasoning. She is a politician in a robe. And that is not the role of Supreme Court justice. But it is, the way the left looks at the court is just another legislative body that if they can't get what they want from Congress, they just go to court to get it. So she fits the bill for them. But
the facts, 100,000 kids on ventilators. Where do you get these?
No one's been on a ventilator for Omicron.
Yeah.
Not one person.
Where are these numbers coming from? You don't expect them to be experts in the field, but you do expect that when they have done some research or at least encouraged the individuals on their staff to do the research, that it would be accurate. And it was amazing how many times she made statements that just had people scratching their heads.
So ahead that you are going to be hearing these oral arguments on this case. You read, the briefs, and one would think that you would be reading the news and you would know some of these things. It's just, to me, it's shocking that, you'd be considering a case of this import and you wouldn't know the facts. That's shocking that you'd be that political that you wouldn't even have the facts at your fingertips.
Well, again, I just thought I'd bring it up. It's something we haven't talked a lot about, but it was just something that just was so incredible that I did read some of the fact-checking that was done on Sonia Sotomayor earlier in the week and just thought I'd mention it one more time. We come back from the break, though. I think we found out a little bit more about why this school board, National School Boards Association, sent a letter actually suggesting that those protesting in school boards were domestic terrorists. And then, not to be outdone, but Matthew Olson at the Justice Department now has put together in the Justice Department a new domestic terrorism unit. We'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Liberals in America often say they believe the U.S. needs to be more like Europe. The next time I hear this, I will respond, so that means you want more restrictive laws on abortion and more voter integrity laws? As I documented last month, if you look at the abortion laws in most European countries, they are quite like the Mississippi law currently being considered by the Supreme Court. That is also the case when you compare our voting laws to European countries. Professor John Lott, in a speech he delivered at Hillsdale College last September, spoke on the topic of election integrity. He began by reminding us that 16 years ago, the Carter-Baker Commission on Federal Election Reform proposed a uniform system of requiring a photo ID to vote. It also pointed out that widespread absentee voting made vote fraud more likely. It is important to remember that none of these claims were controversial 16 years ago. They came from Democrats like former President Jimmy Carter and Republicans like former Secretary of State James Baker. He then documented that of the 47 countries in Europe today, 46 of them currently require government-issued photo IDs to vote. The one exception is the United Kingdom. But even that isn't much of an exception. Many parts of the UK do require voter ID, and the British Parliament is now considering a nationwide requirement. What about absentee voting? Of the 47 European countries, 35 of them don't allow absentee voting for citizens living in country. Another 10 countries allow absentee voting but require voters to show up in person and present a photo ID. If we truly want the U.S. to be like Europe, then we should have more of these election integrity laws. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we're going to spend just a few minutes on one of the articles we posted. It's the fourth article because it helps answer a question. And here's a good illustration of how the federal government told an agency to send a letter to the federal government. And we have, of course, in the past talked about the fact that the National School Boards Association sent a letter to the White House comparing people that protest in school boards to domestic terrorists, and even suggested that you might use some of the laws at your disposal, including the Patriot Act, which I've always thought was a bad idea because even though it was supposed to help us fight terrorists, I was afraid it would come back and fight American citizens, and it did. But again, you wondered what caused the National School Boards Association to send that letter, which then led the Attorney General Merrick Garland to actually then take this unprecedented request to issue a memorandum to the FBI. But Penna, we now found out who actually encouraged the letter in the first place. It looks like it was the Education Secretary, Miguel Cardona.
He tried to act like he was, basically being told this, but he consulted with someone on this letter at the National School Board Association. So he was one of the motivators to even get the letter going in the first place. Of course, it wasn't supposed to be made public, but Christopher Rufo found it. Great investigative guy on our side. And he just said that he was providing information because, the guy that provided information from the NSBA, the CEO, Chip Slavin, he said he was doing it to provide information from a request by the Secretary of Education. So it's sort of a circular
scandal here.
Yeah, and then you got Merrick Garland, who immediately convenes a task force on this issue.
Yes,
proving that he absolutely doesn't belong within a mile of the Supreme Court. And thank you, Mitch McConnell, for keeping him off the Supreme Court.
But he shouldn't be.
So he's now, the Attorney General, the chief law enforcement officer in this country. The Department of Justice, who is charged with protecting your rights, colluded with the School Board Association to label anyone who shows up to engage in protected First Amendment speech and protest school board policies, to label them as domestic terrorists and investigate them with the full force of the federal government. It's beyond me how this is not on the front page of every newspaper in America. This is a scandal. This is worse than Watergate. And
federal government telling another agency to tell the federal government to do that, to go after American citizens.
Yes, who did nothing but show up and again engage in First Amendment protected speech to protest policies that they don't like by elected policymakers at the school board level. That is as American as apple pie. But when you protest things that they don't like, they come after you. And now we have this, new task force on domestic terrorism, which I'm sure the first group they're going to investigate would be, Antifa, right? No, it's not, because those are actual domestic terrorists. People that attack federal buildings and burn down property and possibly, maim or kill people. That's what an actual domestic terrorist looks like. No, their definition of a domestic terrorist is anybody who disagrees with them. And
they said it disagrees with authority. And again, that could be everything from Antifa to Proud Boys. So I'm with you on that. And some of these people are violent. I'm not denying that. But again, when they don't define who your enemy is, who they're going to go after, you kind of wonder who they're going to go after, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I can tell you who their enemy is. It's anybody that disagrees with them. They have proved that over and over and over again.
So it's regular, everyday, ordinary parents.
Exactly.
And we already saw this happen in an election in the state of Virginia. So you're right. If it's on the front page, it's going to really hurt them. And so I think it'd be a good idea if we and our listeners make sure it gets on the front pages.
Well, again, we've given you that information on our website. It's the 4th article. And it's something that, as you said, isn't covered everywhere. But again, let's give credit where credit is due. This was written by the editors of National Review.
Yeah, that's great. I think what's happening here, it kind of makes you scratch your head, because I know last week you talked about the president's approval ratings, and you've posted a chart about his collapsing poll numbers down at approval rating of 33%. And so this president's struggling, obviously. But, some of the things that he is pushing are so unpopular that it's no wonder. I mean, when you have this label for parents of domestic terrorism and now a department at the FBI, when you have a president going to Georgia to blast their laws that's popular in the state of Georgia, that have actually put in place some common sense protections for people in elections, and some of it was just really the way it was done anyway before COVID. So, it's not like you're taking away rights from people getting, they're saying, well, you can't have water when you're in the line for the election because of this law. And, just the lies that are being told about it, that this president is actually passing on during that speech. So there's that. There's getting rid of the filibuster, which is also not popular in the country. It just seems like he's doing, and the vaccine mandate was not popular. And yet we've got a real problem, and that is we've got the Omicron variant rising, and we don't have enough tests for people to find out if they even have it, so they can take common sense precautions. Maybe you don't go to work. Maybe you don't have a family gathering. But no, there aren't enough tests for them to find out. And that is something that this president actually could manage and do something about, could have done it earlier so that we would have them now. So you have to kind of wonder, I mean, that he seems to be doing every day, digging himself a little bit deeper. I don't know how they're going to get out of this by the election.
I might just mention those graphs if you'd like to see them, because, again, I think many people say, well, sometimes a graph or a chart is worth 1,000 words. And we have one on Biden's collapsing poll numbers and another one on the increase in inflation. But these collapsing poll numbers, do you think, Lathan, that might explain why when he went to Georgia, Atlanta, Georgia, and you have a governor candidate, I should say, candidate for governor, governor's
She
race.
thinks she's the governor.
Yeah. I was
Stacey
trying to
Abrams.
get really close because she does think she's governor, so I was trying to figure out how do you say that. A candidate for the governor's office deciding that she had a schedule conflict when you have the president and the vice president of the United States in Atlanta. Talk about that.
That lets you know exactly how popular this president and vice president is, because ordinarily the most dangerous place in any room is between Stacey Abrams and the camera. So when the president shows up, there's going to be lots of cameras, and typically she would be right there arm in arm with him. But yeah, I think she's must have better political instincts than he does, because she somehow ended up with a schedule conflict when the president was going to be there to give this speech. And let me tell you, she made the right call, because that speech, even his own party understands how bad that speech was. Rhetorically, tone, everything about it. That speech went over like a children's party clown with Tourette's. Okay. And sorry, I can hear laughter from the I know that must have been a good line, because I can hear him laughing back there. But the fact, and the other way you know how unpopular it was is because you haven't heard a peep about it since.
But sure,
radio silence in the media. They don't want to acknowledge what that guy said. The great uniter, who basically said if you don't go along with his quote voting reforms, which will do nothing but make it easier to cheat, then he contrasted this as like you're either on the side of Martin Luther King or Bull Connor or George Wallace. You're either on the side of Lincoln or Jefferson Davis. I mean, it was ridiculous. And then he made up the fact that he'd been arrested during the Civil Rights Act or during the Civil Rights protests, when, if you know anything about Joe Biden, as late as the late 80s, he still bragged about being endorsed by George Wallace. So Stacey Abrams, I mean, give credit where credit's due. She made the right call there by not showing up and being a part of that debacle.
One thing that was said came from the Senate Minority Leader, Mitch McConnell, and his statement was the president's rant yesterday was incorrect, incoherent, and beneath his office. Used the phrase Jim Crow 2.0 to...
that they're trying to make voting harder. But California has Kim Strassel pointed this out today in the Wall Street Journal, has among the loosest election laws in the country, and yet they routinely rank at the bottom of turnout in presidential elections. New Hampshire has the toughest, and they have a lot of people turning out. I mean, it's really a big deal to go to the polls in New Hampshire.
It is.
So, these two things do not correlate.
Let's take a break. We have a lot more to cover. We will do that right after these important messages.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. Penna Dexter, Lathan Watts with us today, and I might just mention that our fifth article there has to do with the way the media has covered election law, and it relates to both our booklet on media bias as well as one on voter fraud. And I'll just read one of the points because it gets to the broader question we were talking about just a minute ago, because the author Shane Harris says that while criticizing the election laws, especially the election integrity laws and voter ID laws as voter suppression, the media also refused to report critical polling data showing wide public support for such measures. Anybody that takes just a moment will see that when you talk about voter ID, that is incredibly popular for Anglo-Americans, for African Americans, for Hispanic Americans. If this is a case of people being prevented from voting, I love what Gary Bauer says. Where are the massive crowds in Atlanta or Chicago or Miami or New Orleans or St. Louis coming out saying that they were suppressed voters? You don't see that. And so in some respects, maybe the White House doesn't understand how unpopular these ideas are, because most people think that having a photo ID is a reasonable request to go out and vote, and having extended but not enormously large early voting opportunities, they are not necessarily Jim Crow 2.0. And yet the bottom line is this administration, Penn, as you said just a minute ago, is taking on one unpopular idea after another.
They are. And, I think they think that if the president says it, people are going to believe it. At least a section of the population is going to believe it. And there probably is a section of the population that believes the rhetoric, but it's shrinking because some of the things he says make no sense. And so you consider the messenger, you begin to consider the way it's delivered, you begin to consider, the competence factor. And we're seeing a lack of competence. And I just keep bringing back the testing. But it shows a lack of competence because it was excusable at the beginning of the pandemic when it came upon us. It's not excusable now that we don't have enough tests for people. It just is not. I mean, the lines and the lack of tests on the shelves, the rapid tests on the drugstore shelves, I mean, that just shouldn't be, and it shows extreme incompetence. So when you have your lives being affected that way, plus inflation and all the policies that this administration has, these are just basic responsibilities of government that they can't even do. And they're trying to take on these huge cataclysmic constitutional changes in our country. And so, I don't think it's going to happen. And I think what it's going to do is get Republicans elected in swing districts.
Yeah, you ask sort of off air, if these things are so unpopular, why are they pursuing them? And I think there's an element on their side that doesn't really care if it's popular or not. What they care about is if it's effective. And the left has proven before that they are willing to even lose short term to get what they want long term. And you look at Obamacare as a perfect example. You had a special election to replace Ted Kennedy in Massachusetts. Scott Brown ran on the issue of I will be the last vote that stops Obamacare from going into effect. He won. They knew how unpopular it was, and they used every legislative trick in the book, even after Brown won that election, to get Obamacare pushed through and done, because they knew once it was in place, it would still be, and it's still here. So I don't. There's a way of thinking about politics that, and frankly, there's probably people on both sides that think this way, but we're talking about this administration, and I think that they don't really care if this quote, voting bill that they're talking about is popular or unpopular. What they care about is if it is put into place, will it make it easier for us to win elections? And they have come to the conclusion that it will, and therefore they're going to do what they can to try to get it put in place. And if you're talking about, voter integrity bills and trying to label them as the new Jim Crow era, then you're not talking about record inflation. If you can drive the news media cycle to be about these voting bills, then you're not talking about 7% over the last year, the biggest increase in 40 years. But what I don't think they're calculating correctly is that you don't have to talk about inflation for people to know that it's going on, because they see it every day when they go to the grocery store. And number one, there are a lot of empty shelves. And then number two, the stuff that is there is a lot more expensive than it was even last week. And, historically speaking, people vote their pocketbooks. Okay. When the economy, it may be bad for everybody else, but it's okay for you. And so you're all right. And then once it starts impacting you, then you start paying attention to it. And there's no getting around inflation. Inflation is a tax on the poor. It robs you of the value of your money. And that's something that everybody understands. And I think that's why there's this constant attention to all of these other issues, because we don't want to talk about these things. And you're right to bring up that they've been completely incompetent on the issue of COVID, on everything they said they were going to do. Going back to even the campaign, when Biden campaigned on, I'm going to have a plan and we're going to beat it, up to the point of just a few weeks ago, then you have the same guy who said that saying, well, there's really no federal response to this. It's got to be on a state by state level. And I'm like, so you're a federalist now, Biden? I mean, welcome to the club, pal. I'm glad to have you. And then, of course, they had to come back later with Jen Psaki and try to walk those comments back. But to answer your question, like, if it's so unpopular, why are they going to do it? They don't really care if it's popular or not. They care if it will work. And they think if they can get these things implemented where you have, vote by mail without having to have any sort of affidavit to say that you are who you claim to be, don't have to have an ID, just show up and vote, same day voter registration, multiple places to turn in ballots, 24 hours a day. It is rife for opportunity to cheat. Okay. And I'm not saying that they can't win elections without cheating. I'm saying these things make it easier to do those things.
Right.
And there's obviously an element in their party that thinks this will make it easier for us to continue winning elections and stay in power. And therefore that's what we're going to do. And if we lose a short term, maybe we lose the House, maybe we lose the Senate for 2 years, but we can get this through. So be it, because the next time we will win using this. Well,
stuff. I think they figure that now's the time to do it because they are going to lose. That's one, but the prospects of winning these issues is getting dimmer and dimmer, and I think the filibuster will not be changed either, even though that would be a big win for them.
As long as Manchin and Sinema hold the line, and they both gave speeches this week saying so. I mean, it's tough to recall a president having a worse week than Biden had this last week, with the Supreme Court killing the OSHA mandate on the vaccine. 2 members of his own party standing up and saying, "I will not vote to change the filibuster." He gives a ridiculous speech in Georgia that we mentioned already.
On the day after their team won the national championship.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
A lot of people in Georgia were pretty excited about Georgia winning.
He's come in and
then he
with
comes
a big
in and rains
speech.
on the parade.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he's had a really, really bad week. His poll numbers come out and they're at 33%. With the constant drumbeat of negative media attention that Trump had, his lowest number, I think, was 36. And that was in, I think, the first year of his term as well. So, yeah, rough week for the president. And that, lends, just like you said, to this idea that, we may be about to lose Congress. So let's throw a Hail Mary and see if we can get some of these things in place by the next election.
Well, again, you've run a few elections and been involved in some of the elections. And if you had to right now justify 2 million people crossing the border, botched withdrawal from Afghanistan, inflation at the highest rate in 40 years, people having problems with supply chain, as well as all these other issues, that is really a tough hill to climb, don't you think?
Yeah, it is. It's like living through Jimmy Carter's second term, pretty much. And you saw what happened in 1980. The first chance people got to send Jimmy Carter packing, they did.
Well, I want to take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about what that means for the future. But it was also interesting that some people have noticed something else: insider trading, which we're not allowed to do. But Nancy Pelosi did better than almost all the hedge funds in America. And, of course, that's not something we haven't talked about before, but it's just another one of those issues that's caused a lot of people to say, maybe it's time to issue a few pink slips to some of the members in Congress. And we'll talk about some of those issues and how that plays itself out. But we do need to take a break. And if you find yourself saying, I'd like to read some of the things you've been quoting, it's all available at our website, pointofview.net. Of course, we also sent you to firstliberty.org and firstlibertylive.com for some of those resources. We'll be right back.
Most people don't know this, but roughly half of abortions performed today are not done surgically. They are chemical abortions. Last month, the FDA officially made it much easier to procure such abortions. The chemical abortion is approved to be used during the first 10 weeks of pregnancy. It involves a two-step process which causes a miscarriage. The pregnant woman takes a drug called mifepristone, or RU-486. The drug serves to cut off the hormone progesterone, which is required to sustain a pregnancy. Within 24 to 48 hours, the woman will take a second set of pills, misoprostol. The brand name is Cytotec. These cause contractions. She will likely experience cramping and hemorrhaging, which are often severe, and within a few hours to a few days, she'll expel the baby, alone in her bathroom. The FDA operates a safety program for certain drugs that requires they only be dispensed by a qualified provider. This program also requires the drug be dispensed in certain healthcare settings, such as a clinic or hospital. Mifepristone is one of the drugs that must meet those conditions. But last spring, in its efforts to contain the spread of COVID-19, the FDA stopped enforcing the in-person requirement. So women were getting the abortion pill by mail and taking it alone. Melanie Israel, who writes on abortion issues for the Daily Signal, points out the complication rate from abortion pills is 4 times that of a first trimester surgical abortion. One 13-year study shows a 500% increase in emergency room visits after chemical abortions. Plus, mail-order abortions provide greater opportunity for coercion by an abuser. This risky situation was supposed to be temporary, but in December, in response to demands by the abortion industry, the FDA formally ended the in-person requirement altogether. The FDA just made abortion even more dangerous. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just mention that Monday is Martin Luther King Day, and we are going to bring back to the broadcast some individuals we had on a couple of years ago, and that's Will Ford and Matt Lockett. Now, you might remember the story. Will Ford and Matt Lockett met each other during a Martin Luther King Day in Washington, D.C. Will Ford, African-American, Matt, of course, Anglo-American, and they began to go around and talk about racial reconciliation. And then as they began to trace down their family, turned out that Matt Lockett's grandparents, great-great-grandparents, were the slave owners of Will Ford's great-great-grandparents. Incredible story. Anyway, we're going to have them back on Monday to kind of give us an update on how that story has played out. I think you really enjoy that. Later in the week, of course, we also have Casey Luskin. We're going to be talking about a very important science and faith conference that's going to be taking place in Denton, Texas, but also you can learn a little bit more about that. I know we're going to be getting into the whole issue of what is Christian nationalism, and so we'll get into that. David French will be with us, as well as a man by the name of Ryan Sanders. So we'll cover all sorts of topics, which we like to cover here on Point of View. But just before we finish off our day, I thought there is a theme that's starting to surface in these campaigns, and that is the trouble with these elected officials is they think that there are rules that should apply to you and me, but don't apply to them. And a good example of that came out the other day when they were looking at the fact that all sorts of members of Congress did much better in the stock market than some of the leading hedge funds in America. Matter of fact, only 3 hedge funds did even close to as well as these individuals. And Penna, you remember when we've had in the past Peter Schweitzer on the program talking about the fact that those of us around the table cannot be engaged in insider trading. Remember Martha Stewart? Okay, you don't need to even remember any more about that. And yet, as we begin to look at this, there are some members of Congress that have done very well in the stock market. And I think, let me come to you, Lathan, one more example of where we, whether it's rules on COVID or issues about spending for campaigns, or in this case, stock trades, the rules apply to everybody except members of Congress. And I think you could win an election right now by simply saying, if I'm elected to Congress or I'm elected to the state legislature, I'm going to apply the same rules to us as we actually apply to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I think there's a relatively simple fix for that, because part of the problem is, especially when it comes to trading stocks, is that by the very fact that they're in Congress, they come across information that we're not likely to see, because it's part of, you know, if you're on committees that regulate certain industries and all of this other stuff, you're going to come into contact with a lot of information that the general public doesn't get,
or we just don't get it in a timely manner
at the same time that they do. And so it seems it would make sense to just require once you go into office that your finances are put basically in a blind trust,
right?
You know, that it's turned over to somebody else, that you don't really have anything to do, and make that a requirement of serving.
Makes sense.
And then, you know, once you're out of office, it can be turned back over to you. That would pretty much eliminate the problem, because I mean, the only thing higher than the stock market return that Pelosi got with her eyebrows. I mean, I don't know if you saw her over the weekend. I'm just like, what is going on? But, you know, there's a way to fix that. You know, I mean, a lot of presidents do that. You know, when they go into office,
of course they do.
Obviously, they're going to.
A lot of people do it unilaterally of their own, out of their own wisdom.
But if they're not going to do it voluntarily out of their own wisdom, then maybe it should be a requirement, and make that, you know, a new rule of the House, or you could pass a law to do it. But it's a relatively simple fix.
Sure. And again, this is one of those few times where you have a bipartisan agreement. The latest survey, should members of Congress and their spouses be allowed to trade stocks while serving in Congress? 75% said no. At 69%, almost 70% of Democrats said no, and 78% of Republicans said no, and 79%, almost 80% of independents said no. So this is one time where the American people think that something is not right, and that's just becomes another campaign issue in 2022.
It is, and it's really important to people. And I was thinking about something else that happened this week, and that is in the UK. The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, you know, for not abiding by the rules that he himself has set for other citizens of the UK, you know, just going to parties, maskless during COVID, he's in big political trouble right now.
Yeah. Well, again, I won't know that it will affect Nancy Pelosi or Gavin Newsom in California, but it certainly has surfaced time and time again, and it has been something that might not unseat a governor or even the mayor of Chicago. But I think that there is a winning strategy right now for anybody running for office, and we're in the primary season, aren't we?
Certainly.
As a matter of fact, I was looking at today, exactly 30 days from today, early voting begins in Texas on Valentine's Day. That's just a month from now. And, of course, then many of the other states where we're broadcasting, it's May or June.
But we have such a draconian voting law that we have early voting for, 2 weeks?
Yeah. Clearly designed to suppress the vote.
Yeah. Given the fact that there's only 10 days in, I've looked it up, in Delaware, in New York, and Pennsylvania. So, again, you can see that if the game were played fairly, we'd recognize that, if anything, there should be lawsuits against maybe Delaware, not against Georgia. But right now, the Attorney General is suing Georgia and Texas, right?
Yeah, and we spent plenty of time talking about these proposed voting reforms and what a bad idea they are. But let's just also remind everybody they would also be unconstitutional. The Constitution places responsibility for elections with the states. Okay, and you do not want a federal takeover of elections in this country. The closest thing we had was Justice Department sort of pre-clearance of redistricting and other things related to voting that came out of the Jim Crow era. But it is the responsibilities of the states. And if you don't like the way Texas handles elections, then don't live in Texas. If you like the way New York handles elections, then live in New York and vote there. But don't try to come down here and tell us how to run elections down here.
Just before we run out of time, you can go to firstliberty.org and you will find out a little bit more about some of the cases, because we're still following what happens to the flight attendant with Alaska Airlines. If you went to firstlibertylive.com yesterday, had an interview with Faith with Scripture. And so then you can also go back and find some where Mike Berry has talked about the Navy SEALs. So a lot of great resources. But again, what do we find when we land on your website?
Yeah, firstliberty.org. You can also sign up there to get on our e-newsletter. We send out every week that gives you updates on our cases and other topics and things that will impact religious liberty. That's all there on the home site, firstliberty.org. And then, as you mentioned, our little in-house show, First Liberty Live, has its own microsite, firstlibertylive.com.
And Penna Dexter's commentary posted today, mail order abortion. Let me encourage you to get that. And if you click on the read now, there's a place where you can sign up to receive the Viewpoints commentaries. Mine arrives in your inbox Monday through Friday. Penna's on Saturday. And we're just about out of time, so let me just mention our action item today. It's pretty simple. That is, do you think we should keep the filibuster in the United States Senate? And so, if nothing else, we've got a great picture here of Mr. Smith goes to Washington. Of course, we don't exactly have those kind of filibusters anymore, but one of the things about the filibuster, it makes sure that you get a chance to hear from the minority. And it's a republic, not a democracy. So again, if you want to contact your two senators, most of them have made up their mind, but they need to hear from you anyway. We've made it very easy for you to click on that button and do so. Well, this is a great weekend that we're coming into, and don't forget that next week, Martin Luther King Day, and I'm looking forward to that interview with Will Ford and Matt Lockett. We talked with them a couple of years ago. Great story. You will enjoy that as well. Enjoy the weekend, and first of all, Andrew, thank you for your help as an engineer. Steve, for your help as a producer. Have a great weekend. We'll see you back here on Monday, right here on Point of View.
Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas recently said, "The Declaration of Independence has weathered every storm for 245 years. It birthed a great nation. It abolished the sin of slavery, and it endeavored to address its effects. While we have failed the Declaration time and again, and the ideals of the Declaration time and again, I know of no time," said Thomas, "when the ideals have failed us." While some see our founding as fatally flawed and promote ideas that have failed every time they've been tried, at Point of View, like Justice Thomas, we still believe in America's ideals. And if you do too, make a difference today. Join the Truth Team as we promote the unchanging truth that gave us liberty and prosperity. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. The original Americans responded to the call. Will you? Pointofview.net/team and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.